enchantment of the river. The vents themselves are a portal to our aquifer, and the aquifer is key here when we're talking about taking water out of the river. Hydrologists tell us surface water and groundwater are really one and the same, and one feeds the other. So to just take water out off the surface, to take water out of the aquifer, both are going to affect the equation of how much water is still left to us. The St. John's, Archie Carr wrote, is an extraordinary stream unlike any other in America. And that's not because it flows from south to north, even though most people will cite that as the most distinguishing characteristic of the river. When I was trying to first research River of Lakes back in 1998, 1999, I thought this was like the chief distinguishing characteristic of the St. John's. So I call a geographer at University of Florida and I say, can you tell me why the river flows from south to north? And she says, yeah, she was a Gator fan. She says, yeah, Georgia sucks. That wasn't the answer I was looking for, but it helped me understand better that that really isn't the distinguishing characteristic. It's the fact that the river it's really partly salt, and the salt is not saltwater intrusion, at least not from this century. You can think of it as saltwater intrusion from 10,000 years ago. When the aquifer was being laid down, salt water, connate seawater, or prehistoric seawater, was captured in the deeper portions of the aquifer. And it's that seawater that will upwell, sometimes through point sources, such as salt springs in the Ocala National Forest, sometimes at the inundated springs, such as the Croker Hole in Little Lake George, which is the first magnitude spring, sometimes up through the bottom of sandy lakes, such as Lake Harney and Puzzle Lake. This is me diving and headed into a deeper chamber that is about half the size of this room right here. So we have underneath us a series of, if you will, channels, of streams, of large bays that mimic in a vague sort of way what we see on the surface. We don't always know where these bays and streams are until cave diving cartographers go there and help us understand where they're located. And that too is part of the mystery, part of the enchantment, and part of the science that we can't ignore about what keeps this river system alive. Exploring and mapping these cave systems in 3D help us learn a lot about them, help us learn that managing ecology requires understanding natural systems and not just politics. Here's Eric Hutchison, who's inside of Silver Spring, and it's Eric mapped both the innards of Silver Spring as well as Silver Glen Springs. You can also see here with the much better photography the character of the karst, the very soft limestone that's comprised of sedimentation of thousands of years of sand and coral and bone from the sea itself. You can often see prehistoric fossils embedded in the walls of our caves and aquifer. Here's one of the maps that Eric has drawn, and here you see this is sort of like an ant farm version of the aquifer, as if you're looking at it from the side. And to the right on Silver Glen, if you all have been there, you know there's two vents, one sort of circular and one more of an open maw. Both lead back laterally to a giant reservoir that's about 160 feet deep. At the bottom of that reservoir, there's no rocks and no water on the map because the cartographer has not been there. So in the way that early cartographers mapped the New World, at the edge of known territory, they would write in Latin, hic sunt dracones, here be dragons. The river sustained Native Americans for thousands of years. There was no thought about, let's take somebody else's water, let's simply live the best we can live. Let's take the animals, let's take what we can grow here, let's have our lives, and let's come to some sort of understanding about it all. These were the Timucua, as rendered again by Jacques Lemoyne when he was here at the fort at Fort Caroline along the St. John's River itself. The nature river also imprinted itself on spirituality. thanks to the bounty that the river itself provided through its great biological diversity. It was warm, it was wet, it was spring-fed, so it had lots going on there with plants and animals. And the Timucua and the people that preceded them were basically nomadic to begin with, and when they discovered the river offered so much, they could live, they could dwell on the shores, and they had access to a lot of what they needed to live their lives. They could still farm a bit, they could take the time that they once used for roaming to roam, if you will, in a spiritual way, to consider mythology, to consider the spirituality that guided their lives. And that spirituality was woven into their lifeways. It wasn't separate from it as we regard our spirituality today. It wasn't one day a week for 1 hour a day. It was complete. And to me, that's the key word for understanding and fully appreciating the St. John's or any natural system anywhere we live, is to understand more fully the wholeness of that place. One of the things I've tried to do as a writer is to re-envision what all these stories are about, what all the science is about, to take all these disparate parts and bring them back together to a whole, to give us a sense of wholeness that includes humans as well, that function as part of this larger system. So it's my great hope to return wholeness to a place that technology has greatly fragmented. A healthy spirituality does benefit from a healthy floodplain because it allows us a place where we can experience nature in a way in which it deserves to be experienced. This is not the river, although you will see something a bit like this if you go from the air into the upper St. John's. You'll see lots of floodplain intact down there. This is the Amazon. This is a shot I took from a small plane when I was in Iquitos looking for the freshwater dolphin once. And the people who were living there, living in the little villages along this river where the healthy floodplain existed, still held on tight to their own mythology. It's no accident that E.O. Wilson, the great biologist from Harvard and writer, says that the healthier biological diversity we have, the healthier cultural diversity we also have. And here, this could be Timucua or Tequista or any of the pre-Columbians who were living along any of our rivers in Florida by the time the Europeans arrived. It's not, though. This was a picture I took when we were upstream from Iquitos in the Peruvian Amazon, and these were people who are living today much like the people here lived 500 years ago, fishing from a wooden dugout with hand-made nets near the end of the day. Here's a young boy. This is in another country in Central America, in Nicaragua. Could be 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It happens to be today in Nicaragua. We're looking at, on the left, a shot I'd taken from a small plane, and the upper river south of here, and most of it is south of Sanford. It's the last 150 miles. It goes upstream to the actual genesis of the St. John's itself. And you see a floodplain down there that's surrounded very much by native vegetation. To the right, we see Puzzle Lake, where that river begins to flow, begins to gather some momentum, and before it gets to the middle river, while it's still very much a flowing prairie, you see we have many choices in Puzzle Lake because that's what a river does. It offers us many choices, not all of them easy.